today, experience is the new expectation. So why don't we, because in the spirit of a Neuehouse, why don't we start with Jill talking about HarperCollins?
HarperCollins is a global book publisher that has been headquartered in Manhattan. We've been in our current office for about 40 years, but in Midtown for much longer than that. We are moving downtown, a little bit south of City Hall this May. So we are taking on a huge change culturally, industry-wise. It's also a big change. Most of the big publishers are in Midtown. They're slowly moving around, but we are one of the pioneers. That was a big change for us. Our current office is about 20 floors of very small floor plates. That's almost a maze with a lot of doors and walls. It's not a very inviting experience for our guests, our authors, agents, employees that come into the space. So that was really important in our design and vision, was to do away with that and kind of really think about what our author and agents and new employees, prospective employees see and feel when they walk into our space. So that's what we worked with Environetics. That was our main goal.
To accomplish this vision and establish it into a space, we were tasked with a few different areas, and one of which is single most important, the celebrating HarperCollins' heritage and projecting it forward with a new vision of global and future-oriented company. So the way that we approach the design is to really embracing the brand and storytelling of the experience from the arrival, whether it be an author, an agent, or employee, or any visitors for that matter, from the arrival point through the journey and to the destination, whether it's your workstation or you're seeing an editor. Instead of going through the traditional method of getting off the elevator of a floor and you go into looking for a wall sign somewhere and going through a maze of walls and going to see an editor, you actually go through the whole HarperCollins experience, through their history, through their vision, and before you know it, walking through the reception, through the book corridor, through the vision wall and the history wall, and every nook and cranny that's celebrating HarperCollins, you see, before you even know it, you see what HarperCollins is about. So whether you're an established Nobel Prize author or you're a blogger who's starting to write a book, you will see who you're going to work with. In an open plan, you'll see the designers who's designing your book jacket, to managing editors who's proofreading your books. So you're there and you feel like you're a family, you're in a place. So that was really important goal, to translate that into the design.
I think this is a really interesting shift that's happening in how we perceive spaces, such as hotel and high-rise. It's much like the city. We used to think of the city primarily as the skyline of New York, but I think now we really think about the city as a street. It's the energy of the street. So we have the sort of classic movies of the 50s, which is the sort of approach to the skyline of New York. But I think now it's the street level energy. It's how you approach the street. It's that experience. And that sort of same thing is happening in hotel spaces, high-rise residential lobbies. It's the overall experience, not just the edifice, but the interior experience from the moment you approach on the street to get inside. And it's all those experiences, all those touch points that connect you to this. So that kind of narrative that drives you through is very important. And in the design process, you want to even storyboard this. From the street to slumber, every single point along the way where you meet a concierge, where you come into a space, where you meet the lobby, where you're connecting to this, and those connections to that space offer sort of both emotional reward and also kind of the chance for branding to really connect this and sell the space. So I think there's this interesting change in how we think about these big buildings, the urban energy, New York City, and it's really translating in a big kind of macro way on this idea of hotel spaces, hospitality, because obviously hotels and lobbies have always been very similar in both high-rise residential and hotel spaces. But I think it's really about a new energy, a new experience that you want to connect with, you want to be a part of, and not just what the Waldorf Astoria looks like on the outside. And so I think people also travel a lot now. As you travel a lot, you experience a lot, and you want those same connective ideas that you find on your trips to be present in the place you live. And so what really happens, and I'll let Michael talk about this is the way you help sell space, both as a condo and as a rental, how you connect it to all generations. And it becomes the brand that expresses where you want to live. So it's the city where you want to live in, and it's the hotel, the space and the tower you want to live in.
What's most relevant, I think, to our work is that, certainly it starts in hotels in a highly amenitized environment. That's what we're certainly doing at Hudson Yards. But it began, if you look, at least in our portfolio, certainly with Time Warner Center being a place with very mixed use. We embrace mixed use, so having retail, hotel, residential, office space, cultural, in jazz, and most recently manifest in MIMA, which is on 42nd and 10th Avenue, where talk about amenitized. I mean, that's 40,000 square feet of amenity space. That's an acre of amenity space in an 800-unit building. So extraordinary, because as we actually optimize the floor plates of residential buildings, asterisk make them smaller for your apartment, you actually end up spending more time in these social spaces. So having a screening room, having a kitchen you could rent, having a place that you could actually have a party in, because you won't have a party in your apartment, but you will rent a party room down on the 4th floor and actually take advantage of that. So we've seen these amenity spaces growing in importance, certainly inspired largely by hospitality. And now in Hudson Yards, which is a project which I don't have to say is extraordinary by any scale, 17 million square feet, we've taken that to a whole nother level of half. It's funny you mentioned street. Half of our site is dedicated to public open space. So we can't build on half of our site. It has to be parks. So that's a way of showing that amenities actually matter to people that are making decisions today. And our first office tenants, funny enough, are they're not banks and they're not law firms, but it's Coach, L'Oreal, SAP, and Time Warner, companies that actually value at the leading edge of valuing these amenities. So we're taking things that we learned in hotel spaces, we're deployed them in residential spaces, and now we're actually even bringing them to office spaces to show that this idea of concierge service matters to every single user, not just someone who's staying in a hotel room for one night or a couple nights, but as someone who lives in their apartment and doesn't have time to go shopping or doesn't want to walk their dog because they're working too hard, or even an office worker who wants to have their Uber car sitting there right immediately, or have the gym in the building. So this idea, the world is blending very much in terms of hospitality, inspiring actually every type of asset class.
This new, it was an article by a futurist, and he coined the phrase bleisure, and it was blurred lines where you're blending business and pleasure, which is, I think, really what we're talking about today. And it's just that whole concept where, private and personal lives are all blended. But let's hear how healthcare is really meeting this challenge.
Well, I'll just give you CityMD is an urgent care provider here in the city. I'm not sure, certainly not as well known as the Hudson Yards project, but we have 24 centers operating medical facilities across New York City and Long Island, with about another 50 centers in development as we expand into New Jersey. We provide access to care, as a lot of you are reading about Obamacare coming through, and access to care has been an issue in healthcare for the last 10 years. And CityMD is really focusing on convenient, quality care for patients who are in need. Part of that, and I'll give this over to Brad, but part of the shift that's probably happened 10 years ago and how it affects design, and at least in my mind, is there's been a physician-centric model for as long as I can remember. I'm a physician by training. I guess still technically a physician, but physician-centric models really are focused obviously on the physician, and the way we build facilities, the way hospital brick-and-mortar facilities are currently built, if you ever walk through Beth Israel, is certainly not conducive towards the patient experience. So we've recognized that in terms of how we build our spaces, and that's something we try to focus on in terms of the multiple touch points shifting from the physician to the patient. We focus on the quality of care from the patient's perspective, but also on the door, on the countertop, on the seat, on the flow of the patient through the facility. So that's part of the reason why design has really come to the forefront for healthcare.
The model of healthcare has really changed over the last 10 to 12 years, where traditionally it's been based in a sterility model, which came to being around 1920, 25, where large institutions, large healthcare institutions, were based around antimicrobial, keeping infections to a minimum. It wasn't really patient-centric, it was physician-centric. The good thing for design and designers and everyone out here is that we're not constrained anymore by this big kind of monster of this sterility model. Now we have a way to kind of spread our wings. We can experiment with it being patient-centric. It's hospitality design, but I kind of say it's more hospitable design. It's friendlier design than what we've ever come across in the hospital ER rooms that we've gone to. It's hospitable, it's friendly, it's sociable. The brand narrative is really based upon this outpatient model. It's people that are looking at the brand for the first time. And what design has to do then, because they're looking at it for the first time, they have to have a confidence level in the doctoring that's going to occur in these facilities. So the first thing that we have to do with a new brand, a new healthcare brand, is basically present confidence right at the door. And this is a big word, confidence. It's people have to have, they have to be have an affinity towards what kind of healthcare they're going to get. We were very fortunate with CityMD at the outset in that our flagship was 23rd Street, and we were blessed as designers with great architecture of Ladies Mile with these soaring columns, and we were able to use the architecture as almost stage set design in a way to give the gravitas to the doctors and give a comfort level to patients when they went in there for the first time, using different materials, using architecture, using forms that they rarely have seen, especially in New York in the healthcare industry.
I think everyone wants to know what type of behavioral or cultural changes do we see in the workplace with these hospitality elements being introduced. I mean, I think a wonderful example is the pantry that used to be in the back, and really very little attention was paid to that, and now everybody needs like the Starbucks in the front.
Yeah, it's more of a gathering space. It's a communal hangout area where you can just plug your laptop in. You can work anywhere. It's really very much changed. In our current building, it's almost like a closet that happens to have a sink and a refrigerator, and you just keep your lunch in there. But in our new space, it'll be a beautiful bar with a great setup that is very inviting for you to kind of spend your afternoon there and have your meetings and take your conference calls.
Yeah, and what you'll see, I think Coach is an interesting example for us. They moved, or are moving, from a 15-story brick loft building on 34th Street near 10th Avenue. They love the building, but obviously they've outgrown it. So they wanted to, replicate that experience, that kind of bricky, New Yorky, industrial look and feel, because they thought there was something authentic and New Yorky about that. And we're designing 52-story buildings that are all glass and metal. So clearly we couldn't do that, and we weren't going to build, tall brick buildings. But what they did, they actually cut a 15-story atrium in the base of their building. You'll see it in one of the renderings, and it aligns completely with the High Line. So it's a 15-story atrium where every floor will be connected. So they have this community, this vertical community campus at the base of their tower, which is how they're beginning to work differently. So fine, they can't be in a loft building, but they could have this sense of community around this big architectural moment in the center of the building, which I think is going to be really fabulous and very unique for them. But it's finding a way of attracting talent, giving people a reason to come to work, to have this collaborative space. I think it's been a real challenge for companies.
I think I'm sort of fortunate to have this different perspective also. Rockwell Group is going to celebrate their 30th year, and when I joined the firm a while back, it wasn't 30 years ago, that Rockwell Group was it was not the mainstream. The hospitality that we know of, like hotels, restaurants, particularly restaurants, was kind of on the fringes, and the mainstream did something else that was like, ooh, cool new Barcelona chair in my commercial space. But now I think and a developer told me this a few years ago, the mainstream has moved closer to us. So while 10 years ago they would never have considered us to design interior public spaces, now they would be top of mind, and hospitality designers are top of mind to design these spaces. Because as the culture in the world changes, millennials are in, boomers are going out, there's a whole new world that has to be supported in a different way. It's about collaboration. It's about identifying the space you work in, the space you live in, as being a part of your own personal brand. It's about kind of connecting in a way that feels personal and not impersonal. And for the boomers, which of course I'm a boomer, is more individualistic. It was more like Mad Men. It's trying to get different levels, attain different pieces. It's very goal-oriented, but now it's collaboration is the buzzword. How do we work together? It's all about teamwork, and workplace has to support that. When you come into, it's not just about a key doctor being the most important relationship. It's understanding your whole sort of healthcare. So there's this kind of interesting shift where hospitality, I think, is supportive of a kind of a change that's happening. And so there's actually not really hospitality. I think design is becoming blending the sort of blurred lines she's talking about. It's kind of like we're treating everything not in a way that supports kind of changes at our foot.
So thank you all for joining us, and I want to just thank my outstanding panel again. And please take
Thanks.
advantage of this cool space we're in. We have 1 more hour that we could drink, mix, mingle, and we'll look forward to seeing you outside. Thank you.